The sun was setting behind the dry hills of Santa Vega when Elias, a quiet man with kind eyes, locked the wooden door of his small home. He lived alone on the edge of the desert, in a house that creaked in the wind. People in town didn't know much about him, only that he never raised his voice and always walked with a small limp. One cloudy afternoon, Elias visited a dusty livestock market on the edge of the city. Wind blew papers across the ground, and the air smelled like rust and old hay. Voices shouted over each other, and the sound of hammers echoed as cages opened and closed. In the middle of this noise, a young pit bull was brought out. Its fur was patchy, its ribs showed, and its ears had deep scars. One of its front paws dragged slightly, and its eyes, dark and still, looked like they had stopped hoping. People laughed. "Worthless," someone said. "Too broken to fight," another added. No one made a bid. The auctioneer started to move on, but just before he closed the sale, Elias raised his hand. He didn't speak, just nodded once. Elias took the dog home, naming him Sol. The first night, Sul didn't eat. He sat in the corner of the small cabin, eyes wide open, shaking, every time a door creaked or the wind howled. Elias didn't force him. He simply sat nearby, whispering small stories as the fire cracked. Every night he said the name Sol gently, offering food, water, and space. Slowly the dog began to move closer. He started sleeping near the fireplace, sometimes brushing his nose against Elias's hand. Weeks passed. One night, Elias noticed something strange. Under Sul's fur were burn marks and deep wounds that looked like someone had hurt him again and again. He didn't ask questions. He just stayed beside him, quietly placing his hand over Sol's back until the dog stopped trembling. Then, one evening, a car drove up to Elias's cabin. Sheriff Luna stepped out, holding a file. "We got a report," she said. "Someone's been moving dogs through an old barn near Loma Creek. It's abandoned, but the lights were seen last night." Sul, who had been lying by the door, stood up and growled. His ears perked, his body stiffened. When Elias said Loma Creek, Sol barked loudly and scratched at the door. "I think he knows that place," Elias whispered. The next morning they drove through misty hills and broken fences. They reached the barn just as the sun peeked through gray clouds. Sol jumped out of the car and ran straight to a back wall, sniffing, scratching. Elias followed. There, hidden behind old barrels, was a trap door. Inside, everything smelled of rust and wet earth. Sol began to dig at a corner of the dirt floor, kicking up old wood and cloth. They found a box, metal, locked but rusted. Elias opened it and found photos of injured dogs, shipping tags, and dirty auction tickets. On one paper, he saw a name that stopped him cold: Thomas Aroka. Elias stared. It was a name he hadn't heard in 15 years. Thomas was the man Elias used to work for. Back then, Elias had transported supplies. He never asked what was inside the crates. But one day a box opened, and Elias saw a dog inside, shaking, bleeding. That night, Elias ran. He disappeared, changed his name, moved to the desert. But now the past had found him again. He handed the box to Sheriff Luna, who opened an old case file and said, "We've been looking for Thomas for years. This changes everything." Within days, an arrest warrant was issued. Thomas had changed his identity and was hiding overseas. But now, with proof, his name was known again. People started asking questions. Elias and Sul became known as the ones who brought light to the dark. But Elias didn't stop there. He sold his cabin and moved closer to the town's edge. He built a shelter, not just a place for dogs, but for anyone trying to start over. Sul was the first resident. He no longer flinched at doors or sirens. He walked freely, tail wagging, standing at the gate when new dogs arrived, like he understood their pain. They called the place Sol's Ground. And every morning, Elias sat with a cup of coffee by the entrance, Sol resting at his feet. No one really remembered who saved whom. They just knew that two broken lives had found peace, together. And one windy afternoon, as the leaves danced in circles, Elias leaned down and whispered, "We made it home, didn't we, Sewell?" Sewell looked, eyes soft, and ran into the open field, free at last.